Oh, I was going to get up the take them off for sure. So what's something?
They good. They seem good. This is how I switch on my phone then. Oh yeah, it was full. So it was full for how do you know that?
Sorry. All right. Okay. So usual meet-up shenanigans to get started, trying to work out what screens where. And this is so the speakers. Either you're holding this mic or I'm holding it for you while you do stuff. Okay, this is the setup. Sorry. Otherwise, if we didn't have this, I don't know what we'd be doing. We'd just be streaming in silence.
You might be still mad.
Okay. Maybe I need to unmute the mic. It's good. Okay, right, cool. So, does the clicker even click? Right. There we go. Right. So, we're at Cloudflare. So, thank you to Cloudflare for hosting this, and thank you to Willow for getting this all sorted for us at such short notice. Just as a bit of background information, Penguin offered to do a talk for me up, and she needs to go to the toilet. Oh, we just waited. Sorry. He said, "Yeah, if you can arrange a meet up, I'll do a talk." And thanks to Willow, we're here. Okay, so yeah, thanks to Cloudflare. So housekeeping, if you haven't worked it out already, they're just down here, British corridor at the end there on the right. There's code of conduct, so everyone here should be well aware of the Svelte Society Code of Conduct. So this is meant to be a safe space, free of harassment. So if anyone is giving you any issues, please come and talk to anyone of the organisers here. So organisers, raise your hands. Okay, or speak to Kev directly. Kev is the community boss. So just he's the big boss. So just as a bit of information for where people have come from to attend this evening, we've had people flying from Portugal, Zurich, and Sweden. So we've got a very multinational event this evening. So before we kick things off, I want to talk about two other Svelte maintainers who aren't here this evening, Stanley Howe and Simon Holthausen. Holthausen. Okay, sorry, Simon, if you're watching. They're both going to be at CTS in April. You scan the QR code to get 20% off. We have a list of everyone's names this evening. We're going to be doing a raffle at the end of this evening for a free ticket. So we'll be doing that once we finish the stream. Schedule. So we've got Stack of Babel, Internationalization. Check out every inch of space on that screen there. And we've got Loris talking about that after I've finished speaking. We've got Penguin talking about snake charming in Svelte. And then we've got Rich Harris, who's going to be talking about tenets. And then everyone's been... I'm not sure if we're actually going to get copyright strikes, but it's not music, so it should be fine. Anyway. Oh, sorry, no one can hear me. There's no video. I've been sharing this. That's fine. There's no camera. There's no camera. Right. So that's one video because my laptop doesn't have a camera. Okay, cool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to get Loris on to talk about I-18. So if you just bear with us a second, and we're going to switch some stuff around. We could be, hang on, what's my documents? Right here. Where are you? Right, okay. We're going to do the Raffle winner at the end. So, Loris, where's your screen? Here.
Yes.
Right, so what we're going to have to do is take me out. Right. Then clicker, microphone. Are you going to be okay?
Yeah.
You can.
Oh.
I'm sure you're going to be Right, so let's just get this in.
We need to do safety here, by the way.
Safety.
Where's the fire?
Yoga? Yoga? Yeah. Safety? Oh, no. The other yoga.
Oh, here you go. That's good.
Our host. So it says fire exit that way, so I guess we're going to go that way if there's a fire.
Yeah. Right close to your mouth. Yeah, roughly.
I want to put this over and there we go.
Cool.
Hey. Right. So Tony Uppy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Then here we go.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Loris. I work at a company called pngwn, where we build internationalization tooling that makes it easy for you to build multi-language apps. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been trying to build as many internationalized Svelte apps as possible, and have run into what we think is probably every issue, every pitfall, and everything that works. And I'm going to be sharing those findings today. But first, I want to spend some time convincing you that you should internationalize your apps in the first place, offer multiple languages. And I want to do that by reflecting on our approach to accessibility in general. Most developers I talk to have really understand the value of providing good accessibility and put effort into making stuff screen reader accessible, making sure they have good contrast and everything. And by doing this, first of all, it's just the right thing to do, but we enable many people who would otherwise be excluded to use our apps, use the things we build, and be included with everyone else. But it doesn't only just do that. It doesn't just help the people who would be excluded. It also helps everyone else, because it's better for all your users if you have good layout, if you have good colors, and your power users are really going to appreciate keyboard navigation. There are a lot of languages in the world with a lot of speakers. English is language of tonight, with about 1.5 billion speakers. Most of them aren't native speakers like myself. But if you look at the whole world, most people do not speak English. And most of the people who do are not native speakers. So by only building our apps in English or any other language is worse, we exclude most of the people of the world. And this is really, really unfortunate. We're building this insurmountable language barrier for people. And we're also leaving a lot of opportunity. We're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table, and we're leaving a lot of business for our employers on the table. Because there's billions of people who don't speak in English. If you don't provide an app in their language, they can't buy from you, they can't do anything from you. And there's the same curb cut effect that you have with the other accessibility things, where it also makes it easier for people who do speak English, because most English speakers are native speakers, and they're going to really appreciate it if you offer your app in their native language, even if they would understand English. It inspires a lot of confidence in your product. And so, for example, people don't worry that you're going to be able to ship to them if you offer stuff in the language, because that implicitly tells you care about them, you care about the community, you care about their country. And so if it's so important to offer your app in multiple languages and translate it, why do most companies not do it? I believe there are three main reasons. The first of all is that it's really the business value of offering multiple languages is really, really nebulous. There isn't this direct input-output relationship of if I add 5 languages, I'm going to get this many more dollars. It's really, really difficult to predict. So most businesses just defer it until later, and then they never get around to it. The second problem is that translating your app adds a lot of organizational complexity. So usually your workflow is going to be something like this, where designers, developers, and maybe a manager collaborating and checking each other's work and communicating. But once you decide that you want to offer multiple languages, you're going to need to hire translators. And if we add those, you can see that the connections between people, the channels of communications, more than double. And that's a lot of organizational overhead. And the third reason is that building this in code, providing multiple languages, isn't trivial. And it's this third reason that we're going to solve today. So we're going to take a look at how to do internationalization well in SvelteKit. Now there are a couple technical questions that we need to answer. How do we manage our language state? How do we load translations efficiently? How do we make sure that everything we build can still be crawled? And ideally, we want to keep our code maintainable. Yeah. So let's try that. For language state, you basically have 2 main options. You can either put the language in the URL somewhere, or you can have put it into some persistent storage layer. Database, cookie. If you're building SPA, you could even use local storage. Yeah. And ideally, if you can, you want to use persistent storage because the implementation becomes way easier. The problem is that it's bad for SEO. Crawlers really don't like it if they check the page once and it's in one language, and then they check the page again and it's in a different language. Most websites exist on this kind of spectrum from complex web apps like Figma to very static sites like Wikipedia, which just have a lot of content. And then somewhere in the middle would be something like learn.svelte.dev, where you have the written tutorial and the interactive code section. And the question is, which approach would you use for which site? And there's a pretty easy rule of thumb. If you're getting indexed, if you plan on showing up on Google, you have to put it in the URL. If you don't plan on showing up on Google, if you have something that's behind the login or something, go with persistent storage because it's going to be way easier. Trust me. But if you have to put it in the URL, there are a couple of different strategies that we can use. The most common one is probably just to put a language prefix on the path, because could also use multiple domains or subdomains. And for most common one, you probably just want to add a language parameter. Just kind of take your entire SvelteKit app, wrap it in one of these lang parameters, and add a matcher for it. Just have an array for available languages, matcher, and here's a fun little nugget of knowledge. If you have a matcher that's a TypeScript guard type, you get types on your. Okay, my camera is covering it. That's unfortunate, but you get type completions on your params object. So that's really nice.
I'm not sure if I can move.
It's not super important. It's just a nice to know. Yeah. So for detecting the language on the server, you should probably do that in the handle hook, and then set an events, set the local to the language. If you don't use events, it's really, really easy to accidentally leak the current language between requests. So the language that gets detected for one user could be shown to a different user. You don't want that. It's race conditions horrible. You really want to put this in the locals. Then comes the most tedious part, in my opinion. You have to go through your entire existing app, and you have to update all the links to have the correct URL. And that means going through everything you have, finding every link, finding every component, wiring up everything to the language state. Takes a lot of work, but there's really no avoiding it at the moment. For SEO, make sure you set the language attribute and the text direction attribute if you're planning on using right-to-left languages. Since we detected the language in the handle hook, we already have the state there, so can just reuse that. I believe this is part of the Svelte kit documentation as well, this code examples, so you can look that up there. You also want to make sure that you have the alternate links in your head tag. So crawlers like Google expect that when you have a page that's available in multiple languages, it links to all its alternate versions in different languages. So this is an example component how we could do that. We just loop over all available languages down here. I can't see the laser pointer. And just add the translated version of the path here. To make this a generic component, using the page store is a good idea. Just that way you don't need to pass anything in. Build this once, put it in your layout, and you're done. Now let's move on to localized routing, which is like internationalized routing, but more difficult because we also want to translate these logs. So you have in English you would have user/create. In German you have Benutzer erstellen. In French you have, I don't speak French. So this is really nice. I really like it when sites do this. The way to implement this is probably on our links, wrap it in some sort of translate path option, and then have a look, which then uses a lookup table to give you all the internationalized links. You can use separate domains. That's what the double slashes start, or just language prefixes. Can mix and match. Now this covers translating the links, but what it doesn't cover is the other problem, and that's when we get a request to one of these localized routes, we want to resolve them to the same route. So we don't want to have one page that's Svelte component for every single language. We want to have just one. And I have bad news. There's currently no good way of doing this. The file-based routing really fights you on this, and there's currently no good way of doing this. You have to implement something like this, where every single part of the path is a parameter that gets checked, and then you would need to validate that in your handle hook, and it's horrible. And what we would need here is a concept of rewrites, where you could define a function that takes a request from URL, kind of allows you to remap which page gets resolved. And unfortunately, at the moment, that doesn't exist. Fortunately, SvelteKit is open source. So I did take the liberty of building a prototype for this. And this adds two things. It adds a rewrite hook and a translate URL hook. But the rewrite hook, I'll show you the translate URL hook allows you to kind of do all the wrapping of the links. It allows you to rewrite all the links, all your go-tos, all your redirects automatically. I want to stress that this is an unsolicited prototype. I do not speak for the Svelte team. They don't know I'm making this, as far as I know. But I think that the way to make progress is to build 100 prototypes and throw away 99. So this is a prototype. The idea is you kind of have this flow. When you're writing an A tag, you would just write your regular /about, and this would then get piped through the resolve destination hook, which would give you the opportunity to rewrite it based on the current language. Depending on which language is currently active, you would rewrite this to /yen or /überuns, and then navigation happens over the network. As far as the network is concerned, these are completely separate pages. It's non-divisor. And then you get a request on /yen/about. And the rewrite URL hook would give you the opportunity to remap that onto the page /about. But when you go to read URL, when you go events.url or page.url, window.url, you still see this domain because this is a rewrite, not a redirect. Rewrites do not change URL. Let's move on to the next issue, which is actually loading translations, doing that efficiently. And there's kind of two categories of things that you need to translate: stuff that only appears on one page and stuff that appears on multiple pages. The stuff that only appears on one page tends to be content, tends to be blog posts, just large text. And for that, I recommend that you use the plus server.js files as an opportunity to load the correct language, send it over to the client and template it in. That way you only load it on the client in the one language that's actually being requested. So you're not shipping it in every single language. For multiple stuff that appears in multiple languages tends to be strings in the page shell, for example. Tend to be short messages, and they're the things that you want to use INTN libraries for. Now, basically, every single INTN library works something like this, where you first you have the opportunity to register a bunch of dictionaries for a language, and usually also a namespace. Because you don't want to load every single message on every single page, you break it up into namespaces, and then only load the namespaces that you actually intend to use. Usually, this here isn't a great idea because it loads all languages. So most of the time you use an async import to load stuff on demand. And then usage usually looks something like this, where you have a language key. You just use that, and then it gets resolved to a string. You can also pass parameters. Now, at Inlong, we thought we could do a little better, and sorry, I jumped ahead. I've taken the liberty of taking a look at the guild site, and as you can see here, there aren't that many places where you need to use translated strings. I counted, and on the whole page, including the stuff that's not in the screenshots right now, there are less than 30 messages. So something that you need to consider when choosing an internationalization library is that scaling down is very, very important. I think often when we talk about software, we have the idea of scaling up. How does this perform when we have 10,000 messages, 100,000 messages? But most of the things we do are very, very small. So most of the time, it's more important how well do you do if you have one message, 10 messages. Here are a couple internationalization libraries that exist. And here's how much JavaScript they ship to show one message. And you can see I18NX, which is generic JavaScript, library ships over 40 kilobytes, which is massive to just show one string. And we thought we could do a little better. So we built Paraglide. Paraglide is a new approach to internationalization libraries because it uses a compiler which takes in your message source, your dictionaries, your language definitions, and it spits out these just JavaScript files for each language. And every single message is an export. So it just compiles it into a folder like this, and then you import your messages from there. This has a couple of really nice advantages. First, you get full type safety. You get exactly which languages exist and which parameters each message takes. It also enables tree shaping. So earlier we had the idea of namespaces, putting messages into namespace so that you only load what you use. Because these are just JavaScript modules, they support tree shaping, and they can be tree shaping. And so the bundler automatically kind of shrink wraps your messages so that every page only ships exactly the messages that it needs. And you get this for free. You don't need to do any setup. You don't need to think about this. And I think this Yeah, wonderful. Okay, the graph is cut off, but Paraglide clocks in at 150 bytes for the first message, including the message. That was all these benchmarks here include the message. Yeah. Then this comes with a bunch of advantages. There's one interesting one, which I haven't really seen anyone think about, which is minified message keys. So when you use your messages, you have to posit a key to identify which message you want. And that key appears a lot in your source code because you always need to ship it at least twice, once when you define the message and once when you want to use it. With the JavaScript, with Paraglide's approach, the keys become minifiable, so they become much smaller. And because of that, it not only does it start a lot smaller than other INTN libraries, it actually becomes, the advantage grows over time as you add more messages because it minifies better. Now, there is a drawback to the way we've done this. So it's not reactive by default, it's just JavaScript functions. So when the language changes, you need to manually trigger a re-render to make sure everything gets updated in your UI. If you do this on the whole page, it does have the drawback that if the user entered something into a form, that state would be lost. In our experience, this is not that much of an issue, because if a user comes onto a page that isn't in the correct language, the first thing they do is change the language. They don't start filling out forms in languages that they don't understand. The second drawback is that lazy loading different languages is a bit awkward because you kind of need to tiptoe around the not breaking the tree shaking. Just need to be careful there. Now I'm going to say something a little controversial. Paraglide can lazy load. It's completely doable, but you don't actually need to do it every single time. So if you have a page that's like 30 messages or something, I really don't recommend that you do it, honestly, because it just adds complexity and it barely impacts your bundle size. If you have something that starts really, really small, it doesn't really matter if you add 500 extra bytes or something. And I think a lot of people add language lazy loading before they need it, and it just adds technical complexity when it's not needed. Because of the automatic splitting, you only ship the messages that are actually used on the page. So even if you don't lazy load the languages themselves, you still only get the subset of messages that are used. So with Paraglide, the cost of being lazy here really isn't that big. Now, last time we talked about Paraglide, we announced it at the Svelte Summit a couple months ago, which was a pre-release, and later today I'll be releasing Paraglide 1.0. Thank you. I'd love for you to try it out and give us some feedback. Now, quickly, before I go, remember the organization problem. This is the problem that Inlong is trying to solve, my company. If this sounds, so we built tools that try to solve this issue and enable collaboration between all these actors. If you're interested in working on this, we are currently hiring. Okay, the email address is cut off, but it's hello@inlong.com. If you don't remember, come talk to me afterwards. I'd love to hook you up. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, I am now on Loris's computer. So thank you, everyone. Anthony, come and say a few words to everyone. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but this Svelte Society London is the OG Svelte meetup. Thanks to this guy. So I'm just going to hand the mic over to him to say a couple of words to everyone.
Right, he keeps doing this every single meetup. Scott has been twice. Well, that's so far, right? So Scott is like the most instrumental person in this because he organized everything. He's organized. He's got it in control. And I was really bad at meetups, as you can tell. Right. So actually, Scott should take a lot of credit for this because I think that you've made this into from a small little thing to what it is today. So thank you for that.
Oh.
I'm assuming the talks are ready soon, so we can pass over in a short second. I want to talk about just quickly inlang just then because I'm actually using that, and two things stuck out to me. One is reactive languages. Unless you're Swiss, it doesn't make sense. Like you don't need it, so that's great. I just refreshed the page and changed language because you can do that once. And the other thing about that is, what's the other thing? No, I've forgotten it. Anyway, it was good. Basically, I think inlang is like the de facto I8 net. It's really good that we're doing this. And yeah, right. Is he ready? Can anyone sing? Because we need some filler. Not well. That's good enough. He's running away. I think he's running away. He's running away. He's run away. He's filling his water. It's an excuse. He's going. There's plenty outside, though. For those on the stream, it's really, really rainy here in London today. In here.
No.
You got to talk louder.
Because otherwise, if you put on the loudspeaker, then it'll come through here.
Aubergine. Can you hear me? No, we can't. Look. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Can you hear me? No, we can't. Right. I'll talk more this way. We have a problem with volume just right now in here, but not on the YouTube stream, so you can listen to YouTube in your pocket. What? No, I'm yeah. We need to speak louder in here, and it's easy to forget. So, please project exactly, and enunciate. Are you ready?
Hey, okay, so we've got Pete coming up. Sorry, Penguin. I do apologize.
Penguin.
Hi.
There we go.
Right, we're just going to switch stuff around. So, if you could share your screen onto stream.
So I'm on StreamYard.
So I've got.
You can have your laptop back.
Yeah, sorry, man.
The sound's off anyway. So I assume that's the USB PNP. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, whatever.
Cool.
Yeah, we good?
You're not sharing your camera.
Oh, do you want me to do that? Hold on.
You have to.
I can't. I mean, no, it's fine. I just don't. Hold on. Start camera.
Okay, so the next talk is called Inception. Right. I'll let you announce it.
Okay, everyone. We've got Penguin up next talking about snake charming spell.
Hey. Do I'm a snake. So Rich is always kind of saying to me whenever I complain about Svelte, which is like relatively frequent, he's always saying that what I'm doing is niche. So I figured if it's niche, it might be interesting. You'll have to let me know by the end of this. So snake charming Svelte, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use Svelte at work, and I'll talk about what work is, etc. So snake charming, we use Svelte with Python. We don't use it that much with Python. I think snake charming is a stretch, but I came up with the title and I had to use it. So I work for Hugging Face. So Hugging Face are an AI company, and our official mission is to democratize good machine learning, but democratize has been ruined by VCs, so it now means commoditize, and good is a value judgment and therefore meaningless. So I came up with my own. So first of all, open dialogue. So open dialogue is about, having forums in which to discuss, AI. If this stuff is going to rule our lives for the next decade, we need to be able to have, we need places in which we can discuss kind of what it means and what the best approach is. But it also means having the information to have an open dialogue. And so, open source, but also open checkpoints, open data sets, etc. Like not this kind of pseudo openness where people will release a model without any of the information about how it was trained, etc. So open dialogue, collective ownership. So if these, especially the foundational, air quotes models, if they're going to kind of drive all of the the kind of the stuff we build on top or the more domain specific models, then they shouldn't be in the hands of like a handful of individuals or corporations. Like look at the OpenAI shit show just recently. Like, are these really the people you want in control of the future? So collective ownership, and that should be everybody. And free access. So kind of free access is kind of multifaceted, I guess. Free access is about access to data sets, access to models, like as developers being able to build products, etc., so that using these foundation models rather than them like being in the hands of the few, but also kind of open access in terms of usage, in terms of like, imagine a world in which all our wonderful private schools can kind of like have access to the very best models, etc., and then the state schools can't afford those subscriptions, because it's controlled by a couple of private organizations. Those kind of disparities that already exist are, made worse by AI instead of better, which is apparently the dream. So free access, and obviously free access is it's a bit nuanced. Like compute is expensive. There are practicalities to this and stuff, but in principle, there should be ways in which people can access these things. And then shared responsibility. So responsibility, and this is, I guess, like, again, multifaceted. It's responsibility when we're building kind of AI, these foundational models or, I guess, fine tunes of those models, being responsible, when it comes to things like bias, when it comes to things like safety. That's responsibility for the software engineers who are going to build products with these models. But then it's also responsibility for the people, like the end users using them. We have to be responsible in how we use these tools. So, I mean, all this needs is a sickle and scythe, and we're pretty much full communist. But I still think this is kind of the slightly less soundbitey, but a little bit more genuine version of democratize good machine learning. However, on the topic of good machine learning, here's my democratic scale of goodness. This seemed like a good idea last night at 4 a.m., so we're going with it. So on the red side, we've got AI robots, law enforcement, where who are to whom we are subservient. This is our future, potentially. And then on the other side, we've got me on a beach, drinking rum and eating mangoes. This is good. It's relative, obviously, but this is good for me. But you know, fundamentally, we are like when we talk about kind of like good, it is a value judgment, but it's always going to be. People are going to have different, you know, conceptions of what good means depending on the kind of, you know, the culture or the history, etc. So, but I think fundamentally what we're talking about here is, I guess, like the social good, because what we don't want is to kind of to perpetuate, proliferate, and potentially exacerbate the kind of existing injustices that exist. You know, we want to kind of try and kind of like do things that are in a general public good for everybody, I guess. And that comes back to those ideas of accessibility and stuff where we're not kind of thinking of one individual, but, you know, the collective. It's probably not a popular viewpoint at the minute, but I think this is where we are, I guess. We're kind of afforded some conveniences by AI. I don't think the impact is as significant as people like in AI Twitter think it is, or people in tech Twitter think it is. It's still not kind of, you know, built into our infrastructure. And, you know, for all those conveniences, we're also, you know, there's all the bias and the safety issues that we have. You know, we only need to look at, you know, in general in tech, you know, like health trackers that don't understand the concept of a menstrual cycle is like alien to them, which is embarrassing. And then, you know, in AI specifically, things like, you know, racially profiling kind of, you know, image recognition software, which obviously the Met like really went for because it was such a good cultural fit. Anyway, but, you know, hopefully if we work hard, you know, we have teams working on this at Hugging Face. You know, we do have an ethics team, but again, this idea of like ethics is like someone else's responsibility is like the wrong way to look at it. You know, from I guess a good kind of analogy, I guess, from a front end point of view is like accessibility. Like I remember like when I started out, like back when the kind of the web standards kind of stuff was all kind of like going on and people were talking about accessibility then. And I feel like we're having the same conversations still like 20 years later. You know, and that idea of accessibility being like a blueberry muffin, you know, you can't stuff all the blueberries in at the end. I think the same is true with, you know, we're having the kind of the same conversations now. But in a couple of years, hopefully I can fulfill my dream as a, you know, cosplaying a shipwrecked pirate recovering from scurvy. So in terms of like how, like what Hugging Face is in general, it's a platform. So we've got like, you know, it's the GitHub of machine learning. So you've got repos for data sets and models. You can upload spaces, which are kind of like GitHub pages, but there's compute behind them. But I mean, at the heart of Hugging Face is the open source stuff. So we've got, you know, most popularly, I think, is Transformers, which is gives you access. It's a Python library, but it gives you access to, I guess, the current state-of-the-art models. Again, open source. We have, you know, diffusers for diffusion models. There's a kind of host of other libraries and stuff. In addition to the kind of the free stuff, I guess, there's some kind of infrastructure level stuff. So you don't have to, you know, MLOps is hard. And so Hugging Face has some kind of infra stuff that will take care of that for you. And likewise with those spaces, if you want like a, you know, if you need an A100 to run your 70 billion parameter LLM, then you can rent that by the minute if you have the funds. But there's also like there's a scale down from that. You know, if you want a T4, if you just want an upgraded CPU. So it's a kind of an ecosystem. There's community spaces as well. People are building in the open. That's roughly speaking what kind of Hugging Face is. Another open source library that is kind of part of the Hugging Face family is Gradio, and that's what I work on day to day. Gradio is a Python library that allows you to kind of build a web app in just a couple of lines of code. I'm going to demonstrate it with one hand, apparently. I need to reload this. So it's a Python library, so we need to import this jar. Then we're going to create a new variable. Ignore the errors, they're meant to be there. Gr.interface. Well, it's harder with one hand than you'd think. So we're going to pass in our, first of all, we need to pass in our inference function. So you've been working hard on this code for months, and you really want to share it with the world. It could be potentially revolutionary. So sharing code is passé, so you want to share an actual demo. So here we're going to define the input components. Then we're going to define output components. You're going to hold?
Yeah, I'm going to hold my tree.
Okay, so now we just need to launch it. So we can demo.launch. This is why no one live codes. So and here we can kind of like, hello, London friends. Felt wrong. No, we can run this. And so this is as much code as you need. So obviously, you're in the Python ecosystem, you're building kind of like Python apps. So Gradio is a way to just kind of build a complete web app with a couple of lines of Python, in this case, kind of 3. I'm just going to kind of remove, I think I'll remove this. As well as this interface idea where we've got an input and an output. Sorry. We also have a blocks API, which if you want to build more complex apps. So originally, the reason Gradio ever existed was for machine learning researchers to kind of share their demos, to get feedback, and to, it's also important for repeatability. Often papers will release this information saying, oh, you can do this thing, but no one can reproduce it, or the code isn't produced, or so on and so forth. So this allows you to like actually provide not just running code, but also and like a UI that people can play with. But we also have a blocks API, so I'll do a quick one. And this allows you to build more complex kind of like demos where you can actually kind of like, essentially you've got the full, any layout you want, any relationship between, I guess, any dependencies you want as well. So we'll do a we need to do it with this is Python. It is what it is. But you can build relatively complex it'll do. I think we're okay now. So, and this, and you can kind of like hook up event listeners by kind of assigning variables and kind of, etc. Oh, hold on. I'll do change. You do this sort of thing. So, and then you could kind of hook up all of those kind of like, whether it's buttons and so on and so forth, kind of manually, and build more complex demos with more complex relationships between different kind of types and stuff. So I don't want to kind of like go too deep into the Python stuff, because that'll probably be boring for non-Python people. So we'll jump. Am I out? I'm not out. So, like, obviously, Python people want Python. This isn't for front-end engineers at the end of the day. That's not to say it isn't useful. There's still a lot of stuff happening here that you might not want to set up yourself. But mostly, this is predominantly for people roughly in the machine learning kind of sphere. And all of those libraries, PyTorch, transformers, TensorFlow, etc., are in Python. There's also the data science use cases, like with NumPy and Scikit and stuff like that, also Python. It definitely has the richest ecosystem for that kind of stuff. But then there's this ease of deployment issue. Like I say, MLOps is hard. Infrastructure is hard in general. MLOps is even harder. And if you need, if you need GPU for your model and you want to demo it, like renting something for like a month from AWS is incredibly expensive. So being able to just like push it to Spaces or something, upgrade the GPU if you need to. They go to sleep and stuff, so you only pay per minute and stuff. It's a little bit more approachable, I guess. And it's just a GitOps tool, Spaces, so you just like push your code and it will build. And Gradio is a first-class citizen there. But then there's this idea of like things like worker per event. Obviously you could, if you wanted to, you could spin up like an API, you could host it somewhere, you could hit it and all that sort of stuff. But if you did want a kind of a monolith, in this case, what we do is for every event, and that could be, and that's typically like whenever you've got a predict function, that would be one event. For every event, we have a single worker on the server. And this is really important because if you try to parallelize anything, when you're dealing with that kind of compute, you're just going to kind of go out of memory straight away. So every time you create a new event, maybe like some interactions with the UI, you just want to, I don't know, update the UI. You just want to do some very, very basic stuff. But then other things are going to run like these like really heavy models. So Gradio kind of creates one worker per event. So then all of your kind of heavy model stuff is going to essentially going to be run in serial, no matter how many kind of users you have. Whereas all of your, the smaller tasks, UI tasks, relatively basic kind of state manipulation stuff, that can kind of run in a separate worker. And then we have a queue as well, because this stuff takes a while, so you need to tell the user, hey, we've not forgotten about you. You'll be, in 10 minutes maybe, or an hour. It's not very satisfying, but it's better than not knowing anything and it just kind of like continuing. Is this where it goes really bad with the slides? Not yet. So the way this fundamentally works is not particularly complicated, although it's a relatively niche use case. We're using Svelte under the hood. We've got a Python library that's going to generate a Python backend and a Svelte front end, and it's pretty decoupled. And these are the only three things we really care about. We've got a list of components, and this is kind of the name of the component. We have something like, I want to say 30, 35 different components. So the primitives in Gradio are these like images and audio and text boxes and stuff. And they're much, much more batteries included than you'd expect from like if you were to use a typical component library. Like our text box is a text input and a text area, and it will resize itself, and you can set max and min kind of heights and stuff. It does a bunch of things. And the same is true of all of our components. So all we have is a list of components, and that's just like each kind of component instance, the props it might have. You can set like keyword arguments to have like ranges and steps like you'd have on a range kind of input and stuff like that. And then we have our layout, which is a tree. So it typically looks like this. It's like, it looks exactly like this. It doesn't typically look like it. It's just a list of, it's a root node with a bunch of children, which are also root nodes. It's just a recursive tree. And then we have our dependencies. And this is like, for all of the talk of reactive UIs, this is all you need for a reactive UI, really. You need a bit of DOM, you need some state, and you need some dependencies. You need some event listeners. And those event listeners are going to update some state, etc. In our case, I guess it's a little bit more complex. An event has a target, a button is clicked, an input changes, and then we decide, like, we have this function living on the server, and so we need to kind of have inputs to that function. So we decide these components are going to be the inputs, and then we have outputs. So once that kind of predict function has finished, this is where we're going to pass it. So it's relatively straightforward. We just dynamically load the components we need pretty much at the start. And then we kind of render anything. We had a single listener at the top. We use kind of custom events to, so we don't need to kind of like add change and inputs and blah, 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 all these different kind of event listeners. We delegate that right to the top of the tree. And we just listen for this kind of Gradio custom event that has an ID and an event type and stuff like that. And then we can kind of like essentially make an API request. So it's completely decoupled. We've got this API. We use SSE. We used to use WebSockets. But WebSockets doesn't play very nicely with kind of cloud platforms and so on and so forth. But SSE kind of sucks as well. So it's not been very smooth. There are connection limits and all kinds of things. You can't pass around binary data. I think it's probably the right choice still, but there's still some teething issues with SSE. But we do that so that we can send updates to users about things like, you're fourth in the queue. It's going to be 20 seconds and all that kind of thing. We kind of keep a rough ETA. It's not guaranteed because parameters can change, but is this where it breaks? This is where it breaks. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is it's kind of like roughly how we're using Svelte. It's relatively straightforward. The real complexity comes in the fact that we have so many constraints. And I want to just jump into my terminal. So what happens if your use case isn't covered by one of our existing components? And that was a question that we had, I don't know, a year, 2 years. But in kind of like version 4, we released this ability to build your own components. So, yeah. Thank you. Well, now I can't see the screen. So, oh look, that's very convenient. So we created custom components, which allows you to build your own custom kind of components, which might be a Python component, a front-end component. And so we've got this CLI, and this kind of like puts Svelte, I mean, I guess the Python as well, front and center. It's installing.
Yay.
We might be a while. No, it should be. Okay, good. So I'll just open this up. No. So, oh, hold on. Yeah. Okay. So what this is this is a CLI, and what we were able to do here is kind of like bootstrap a kind of like a template for a custom component using our existing components. So in the kind of like the front end, we have a couple of files. It's relatively, it's not really helpful, is it? It's relatively straightforward. I mean, there's a few more files than you'd maybe want, but it is what it is. And then we've got a Python class here. And this is image is one of our more complex kind of classes. But the point is, all of our internal stuff that used to be implementation details, stuff that used to be hidden away, is now basically public API. The other thing that it's kind of like important to note, I guess, is we have like, I guess I'll do a zoomy. We have all this kind of at Gradio stuff. So now all of this other kind of like stuff that used to be internal modules are also now like published on NPM public. Like literally all of our internal APIs now become public. And obviously there's a lot of kind of context that's passed down into each individual component. And that's where most of the complexity comes from is, and I'll just show this. We also have kind of like a dev mode, Gradio, and this gives you a kind of like, you know, the kind of live reloading experience you're used to. Come on. From, I'll open that here. Oh, let's do this. From JavaScript, but also in the Python. Oh, go away.
Say that again. Python.
In the Python. Is that the one? That's not the one. That can't be it. No, that's not it. So, like when we, let's zoom in here. Oh no, that's so we kind of like, we go in through here, we'll change the label. So this is like, this is what we consider a label here. So, you know, and that's mind blowing in Python. Obviously in JavaScript, no one's impressed at all. That is genuinely mind blowing. And obviously you get kind of the same if you add this in the Svelte files, but all of a sudden our kind of like our Svelte files are all API. Likewise, we have a lot of kind of complexity in terms of like lots of our values that are passed in, our complex objects and stuff, and this causes a lot of pain as well. So like this stuff is like its design system, its template, it has to kind of fulfill the basic kind of, it needs to be a component, like it needs to be useful to us internally as well. And we have all of these constraints. We also want people to hopefully contribute, so it's open source. And yeah. So that's kind of like difficult in Svelte 3. There are a number of things that are difficult in Svelte 3 or 4, I guess. It's all the same. But in Svelte 5, I think I'm okay. In Svelte 5, that's all change. So if I can, okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so in Svelte 5, there are three like main things that are kind of, for us at least on the Gradio team, kind of game changing. The first one is kind of is reactivity. So granular reactivity is like a massive game changer. But specifically the whole kind of like the class kind of like madness is particularly nice. We obviously we're using Python on the back end and Svelte on the front end. And I'd like us to use more classes in our front end code, partly just for consistency between the two code bases, but also because classes are kind of nice. You know, currently, so this is how, this is kind of like, this is an actual, this is an actual file class. We work a lot with files and we kind of like push all of our stuff up to the, like all of our kind of binary data up to the server. And then we could just like work with paths because they're easier to kind of pass around as JSON. So if you kind of try and do anything with an object in kind of like Svelte 3 or 4, like your reactivity is going to be kind of confusing. So if we reassign this, I've got this little, let me see if I can do a zoom in. Okay. So if we reassign this, like what we expect to happen is going to happen. Everything pretty much increments by 1. We're tracking kind of changes to path, URL, and name here, which are kind of these properties here on the class. And that's fine. But when we, so here, down here, on mutate, like we're just updating URL. But like when we mutate this, we're getting changes to pretty much everything. Like it doesn't like have any kind of like concept of the fact that just a part of the property has changed. So in Svelte 5, that's kind of different. So here we've got like, it's a class. We created these kind of static fields with the, the state rune. Oh, let's do the zooming again. So we reassign. First and foremost, it's already like more consistent. That annoyed me previously, but we reassign what you expect to happen happens. Like we're completely blowing away the object. But if we update the path here, or is it the URL? The URL here, we just got a change for URL. But now this callback only changes it to the same thing. So like nothing happens. And this is a massive deal for us because we do a lot of we work with a couple, like we don't have loads of dependencies, but we work with some libraries. We have a bunch of side effects. And honestly, side effects are difficult enough to work with, like as it is. I don't need like more like work being put on me. I don't want to have to like, often we've got to diff objects, keep track of an old value, like, it like de-equal it or something, use some kind of small kind of like diffing library. If it's not different, don't do anything. If it is different inside of reactive declaration, then do something. That's tedious. Like it's fine. And there are a bunch of patterns where you can kind of, I'm going to deconstruct this. No one wants to write code like that. We want to offload all of this work to our framework. And Svelte 5, for the most part, allows us to do that. I know people are upset, like a little bit upset about this on the internet. And
A little bit.
Well, the thing is, right, so the reason they're wrong is not like, it's not because like there isn't any trade-off here, right? Like, so there's an increase in complexity and about how you define your state. And, there's more cognitive overhead in terms of like understanding these runes. But one thing like you learn, I guess, after a while is you never remove complexity. You just like move it around. And where like all of your abstractions are just like shifting complexity to where you're most comfortable with it, whether it's a library or it's like, utility or in your own code. And the thing here is like this complexity is like, yeah, you've got to understand state, potentially derived, maybe things like, effect, although you've got to understand like reactive declarations anyway. So like, I don't think derived, like reactive declarations and reactive assignments. So I don't think derived and effect count really. You've got to understand untrack maybe, but you've also got to understand the idea of hiding reactive variables inside functions anyway. So I don't think untrack really counts either. And this is the thing, is like we're kind of like changing some concepts around, we're swapping some ideas, but at least these are all like functions or values or something that you can kind of like look up in the docs or something, rather than a convention that you have to just kind of like magically discover at some point. But then the other thing is like, this is like mostly boilerplate. So state, like we need to kind of like figure out how to set up our classes, how to set up our kind of like state. What you have like, whereas the alternative, let's go back to it, it's less code, right? It's simpler in principle, but trying to reason about like what's going to happen is impossible. And then you have this kind of explosion of complexity, so that as your kind of component gets more complex, the code becomes even more difficult to reason about. So our complexity is not in the initialization, but is in like reasoning about the data flow and the kind of essentially the dependency kind of relationship. Whereas in this case, most of the complexity is here, and the predictability around like how state is going to behave later is more explicit and just like more consistent. It seems to behave itself like much, much better. So, and this doesn't scale, like this doesn't get bigger. That just stays, it's static. So the complexity that we've kind of like swapped for is a kind of a static complexity. And the complexity we've kind of like made go away is this kind of like weird kind of like wibbly wobbly complexity that you can never quite put your finger on. Like I still struggle to sometimes reason through Like, why is this thing updating? Like, nothing is touching it. Like, it can't possibly be touching it. And I mean, obviously something is. I'm wrong, but so, and again, like the whole like there's a whole class war and sorry, there's kind of like there's been a lot of issues with classes, and well, all these people have kind of like proclaimed that there are problems with classes, but realistically, classes are fine. Some patterns are kind of like bad or problematic potentially, but I think people are frightened of classes, and I think this kind of stuff is actually really, really nice, especially if you like already have classes and you want to make like certain properties reactive. Like that's really nice, and the progression from, if you're going to do this with a store, you've got to like create a big kind of a constructor thingy or like wrap it up. It's a lot of code, whereas this is just like a couple of definitions. So that's good. So the next thing we're going to talk about is this. This is I don't know, like the reactivity thing is like better, like in theory, but like I'm more excited about snippets than anything. So that's fine. So this is kind of like, I guess, like a classic case of a child where you want to render content in different places. And currently the only way to do this is via data. You can pass data like up to some context, and you can kind of like render it out, but like you can only do like, it has to be the same shape. So like if you wanted to render different things, like different, and this is all powered by snippets here. So like you can pass snippets into, we're actually passing snippets into context here, and then kind of pulling them out and then rendering them in some parent. And we have some kind of, I haven't like rewrote this in kind of vanilla Svelte because it's complex, but like we have like a bunch of components where we need to render multiple things in multiple different places, and we don't have that kind of capability today. So this is actually a thing that you just can't do unless you kind of like just kind of like go back to programmatically just kind of like inserting things into the DOM or whatever. And that is, for us, is like going to be a huge kind of a huge benefit as well. Nah, that didn't work. And so that's me done. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Sorry, mate. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't know we had it until 8:30, not 9. So yeah, I totally missed everything. I'm so sorry. I didn't.
How long was it?
20, 25 minutes.
Okay.
That's fine.
Right, that's fine.
Okay, so let's just leave it on this for a sec. So got Rich up next talking about tenants. So what we're going to do is the usual jiggery pokery we need to do between swapping computers. So just bear with us while we get this sorted.
Okay.
Right. So I almost put that down before you I should be able to share one of those.
Okay. So interact.
What is this?
Okay.
So do we need the screen attached? Right. This is the form.
No, I don't think so.
Can I just skip that part? I don't care about the keyboard.
Well, maybe the red close button. Oh. So where's the StreamYard? It's over there. Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately, Rich, it looks like it is showing as.
Can I?
Which one are you sharing?
I want to share this one, but I want to have a. Wait. Oh, okay. So is StreamYard powering this as well?
Yeah. So I'm sharing. We can plug your screen into that. But then what we're going to share, yeah, no, that's fine. Because then your screen's being shared, StreamYard.
Yeah. But all right, I don't know if this will work or not.
We're doing it now. We're doing
All right,
our
so
Rich.
can I?
Yeah, so if you go to range, I think it is. No, sorry. If you click one of
So this is purely for the benefit of the people on YouTube, not people here.
yeah.
I just need to bellow.
Yes.
All right.
I don't know how close you need to keep it. So if you really like shout,
Yeah.
then it's probably not. For
Yeah.
You. So,
We'll see. We'll try it.
yep. I'm sure people will scream.
Okay.
Good to go. Okay, screen right? Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
There we are. All right, hi everyone. Happy New Year. I'm really excited to be here. The last time I went to Svelte Society London, I was in Brooklyn, and it's been an ambition of mine to make it here in person ever since October 2019, when the first Svelte meetup happened, which nerd sniped Swix into creating Svelte Society so that we could have a New York meetup on the same day. Due to time zones, it happened a few hours later, so London wins the prize. But it was still one on the same day. It's lovely to see so many members of the community from that era who are still around and that we're still welcoming new people into the fold is quite lovely. So happy to see you all. This is a time of year that traditionally we reflect on our values and make promises to ourselves in the form of New Year's resolutions. And so I thought this would be an opportune moment to think about how that applies to Svelte and try and articulate what our bedrock principles are and think about what kind of project we want to be. And so I've drawn up a list of 10 things that I think do a reasonable job of articulating the Svelte philosophy, which is a phrase that we throw around from time to time, but haven't really ever really defined. This is more of a proposal than something that's carved into stone. I'm not claiming to speak for the project, though my sense is that these are values that are largely shared by the community. So let's get into it. Number one, I'm not a religious person, so I don't throw this word around a lot, but I do think that the web is sacred. It is an advancement in our capabilities as a species on par with the printing press, which laid the foundations for the Enlightenment. And against all the odds, it was gifted to us by far-sighted technologists in the form of open protocols that belong to no one. Truly is a miracle, and we're still so early in the process of figuring out what it means for humanity. It is our responsibility to be good stewards of the web and leave it in better shape than we found it for generations to come. And the web is for everyone. And I don't mean that in like a lame come-by-our sense. I mean in a very practical way, the web is the means by which information and goods and services are delivered to the bulk of humanity. The web is as essential to modern life as electricity or plumbing. And so it is incumbent on those of us making stuff on the web to do so in a way that provides access to all people, regardless of whether they are technologically sophisticated or fully able-bodied or financially able to update their devices as frequently as most of us do. It's not enough for everyone to be able to access the web, however. It is also essential, given that so much of our culture is digital, that people are also able to contribute to the web. And right now, that is too hard. Most content creation happens via privately owned platforms like Instagram, where both creators and consumers ultimately are working for corporate interests. And to the extent that things like tweets and videos and Substack articles and so on become part of the web and become part of the cultural commons, it's really more by accident than it is by design. What I really mean by this is that software is a bit rubbish. I'm personally quite alarmed by it. There's a talk that I often recommend to people called Preventing the Collapse of Civilization by Jonathan Blow, in which he conducts an experiment. Over the course of a day, just make a note of every time you encounter software that is in some way broken or ill-designed or user-hostile. If you do this exercise yourself, it is genuinely quite shocking to realize just how much rubbishness we accept and work around on a daily basis. Now, Blow's thesis is that software is actually declining in quality. And I don't know if that's true or if it's just seems that way because it's so much more ubiquitous nowadays. But either way, it is a problem. This is a photo I took last night as I was walking past the Scientology church. You get the idea. And I think there is a particular rubbishness to the web. There's a lot of websites that I genuinely dread having to use because they are so shit. And often, it pains me to say it, the native versions are better. We've all experienced jank, layout shift, unresponsive buttons, frequent login requests, broken login flows, and so on. And the web just tends to feel like a lower budget version of software, often because it literally is. And some of that rubbishness can be traced back to the fact that the web was originally a network of static documents that has evolved application capabilities in a very ad hoc and organic fashion. But a lot of it ultimately stems from the emergent properties of network effects and the web's economics. And that will need more imaginative solutions to overcome than improvements to the platform itself. So we're not going to take responsibility for those, but just as like a general context for all of this discussion, the web is a little bit rubbish. And the web is dying. This is a bit of a controversial statement, but I invite you to consider your own habits. If you're anything like me, then you probably use the web a lot when you're sat at your laptops, but most of the time when you're on your phone, you're using native apps instead. And that is at least partly because we have ceded so much ground to companies that don't want you to use the web. You know, I said a couple of minutes ago that content ends up on the web by accident, but nowadays companies are trying to make sure that those accidents don't happen. Like, think about how aggressively you are pushed to use the Reddit mobile app instead of the website, or how you're no longer able to see conversations on Twitter without being logged in. For us, growing up, the internet and the web were more or less synonymous. People joining the digital world today, whether in other countries or the next generation of users, they often skip over the laptop part and they go straight to mobile phones. So in many parts of the world, people don't use the web to communicate and to buy and sell. They use WhatsApp and they use WeChat. And Zoomers don't use Google search anymore. They use TikTok, which like, I don't know how, but they use TikTok instead of Google search. And we can't blame them because Google search is also dying. So to summarize all of those points, the web is important. It's really important, but it needs our help. It needs people who care about things like openness and longevity and equality of access, and who are optimistic enough to believe that we can fix its flaws and leave it in better shape for the next generation. I'm not deluded enough to think that a better UI framework can fix all of those things. A million challenges facing the web. Economics that favor ads and surveillance and centralization, the lack of user agency over data, a standards process that is largely captured by browser vendors, the biggest one of which is an ad company. And there's a lack of web native concepts of identity and payments. And none of those things have anything to do with the challenges of building fluid and resilient user interfaces. But all of these problems have solutions. And if enough people grab an oar and start rowing, I do believe that we can steer the ship in the right direction. And that is why, out of all of the things that I could be doing with my life, I choose to work on Svelte, and I'm still motivated to work on it 7 years in. Number two, I sometimes ask myself, why on earth do people use Svelte? We're not the biggest framework. We don't have a ginormous ecosystem like React, or a stranglehold on the job market, or the traveling circus going from one conference to the next. We're fast, but we're not the fastest framework. Even with Svelte 5 on the horizon, there's always going to be something that is just a little bit faster or a little bit better optimized for the benchmarks. We are small, but we are not the smallest framework. Some frameworks make a big show of being really closely aligned with certain web standards. We don't, because a lot of the time we think those standards are a little bit crap. We're not the oldest and most established framework. We're not the newest and the shiniest framework. We use a compiler to transform your code, but not as aggressively as something like Marco or Quick or Elm. So what exactly is the appeal? No, genuinely. What I've come to realize over the years is the smallest and fastest and other words that mean some narrow definition of best are only ever really post hoc justifications for the decision that you were going to make anyway. People use Svelte because they like using Svelte. The fact that we're small and fast and easy to learn and feature rich and financially supported and have a wonderful community, like these are all just really, they mean that there are no good reasons not to use Svelte. And I think that the reason that people like using Svelte is because it jibes with their mental model. It matches their aesthetic sensibilities. The vibes feel good. Or maybe they don't feel good, right? Every now and then someone will write an article about all of the ways in which Svelte is disastrous on a technical level. But when you scratch the surface, what they really mean is they don't like the vibes. That's fine. We're never going to win those people over. And if we try, then we risk destroying the very thing that made us successful. Now, vibes are obviously somewhat hard to define. We cannot enumerate the contributing factors because often we don't really understand them. All we can do is make good vibes an explicit goal of the project. Number three, one thing we don't optimize for is adoption. You will never see us begging for GitHub stars or things like that. And to be clear, I don't think other frameworks do consciously optimize for adoption, but I do think we have a tendency in our industry to view adoption as one of the primary measures of success. And unless we actively resist it, there's this ever-present danger that you'll end up making design decisions on that basis. We are not trying to be the most popular framework. We are trying to be the best framework. And sometimes that means making choices that we believe in, but that go against the grain of web development trends. An example of that is that we are an HTML-centric framework, when most others are JavaScript-centric. There's a lot of really good reasons to be JavaScript-centric. You don't need to invent logical constructs because you have the full flexibility of the language at your disposal. And it's a really good expressive language that lends itself naturally to complex composition and so on. But I'm convinced that it is the wrong starting point for thinking about UI. JavaScript is an event-driven language. When you write JavaScript, you're primarily concerned with what is changing. But when you're describing a UI, you're primarily concerned with state, which is the opposite. And so what JS-centric frameworks do is they sort of paint a declarative layer on top of the language. And that's how we end up with hooks and reactivity primitives. And even then, we tend to find that we're not operating at the right declarative level. So we use a syntax on top of JavaScript, JSX, that lets us pretend that we're writing HTML. I don't think those are bad choices. They're perfectly fine choices. But we could just be writing HTML in the first place. Turns out that HTML is actually a really good language for describing UI. We just need to augment it to make it suitable for describing interactive UI. Not everyone loves the syntactical choices that we've made to achieve that. And that's also fine. If anything, keeping out the sort of people who miss the big picture for the superficial details has probably been good for our community. And having Svelte be a superset of HTML makes our lives better in other ways. It gives us the opportunity to apply optimizations that would be trickier in a JS-centric world. And we have a sensible place to put our CSS, like namely a style tag. And so there are things like that that lead me to believe that HTML is the right starting point for a UI framework. Number 5, there is a tendency in the web developer community towards a form of pessimistic nostalgia that I think is quite harmful. And the narrative goes something like this. The web was good and pure until about a decade ago when people turned away from God's light, jQuery, and embraced the devil. Back then we didn't have package managers and bundlers and TypeScript and single page apps and all this other newfangled nonsense, and everything worked perfectly and we were much, much happier. Trouble is, it's absolute bollocks. I was there and it sucked. Some of you were there too. Some of you look like maybe you weren't there, but take it from those of us who were. It was terrible. I saw a lovely quote the other day from Simon Saris about pessimism and optimism. Over long time frames, the pessimist becomes an unobservant man and the optimist creates the world. As a community, our default position is one of optimism about technology. The platform is getting better. Our devices are getting better. Our tools are getting better. And if we embrace that fact, then we can make better stuff. So we want to innovate. We want to adapt other people's innovations. We embrace TypeScript. We embrace build tools. We embrace client-side rendering and navigation. All of these things are better than their alternatives. And when people try and tell us otherwise, we examine their arguments with a skeptical eye, because their fundamental position is a pessimistic one. And when other frameworks introduce new ideas like signals or server components, we look at them with interest and jealousy and try to work out how we can incorporate the good ideas instead of resting on our laurels. There's always room for improvement. Number 6, as developers, we are trained to think quantitatively. Spend a lot of time thinking about big O notation and examining various measurements of things in the network tab, in Lighthouse and benchmarks, and trying to make the numbers go in the right direction. And there's nothing wrong with that, exactly. It's good to approach problems with numerical rigor. But the result is a culture in which the numbers themselves become the goal. I'm very fond of Goodhart's law, which states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And you'll sometimes see people showing off their Lighthouse scores, but then you use the site and it just doesn't feel good because choices were made to make some number bigger or smaller instead of to improve the actual user experience that the numbers are supposed to be a proxy for. You cannot replace human judgment with numbers. You need to think qualitatively, not quantitatively. Number 7, as a compiler, we're not beholden to anyone else's rules. We can transform code in all sorts of strange ways, but we try to exercise restraint because it's important that the system is understandable. That's why, for example, we show you in the REPL how the code on the left is being transformed to the code on the right. We don't want Svelte to feel like a black box. We want it to be as transparent as possible. But there's a subtle line between something feeling magical and something feeling like magic. We want Svelte to feel magical. We want you to feel like a wizard when you're writing Svelte code. Historically, I think Svelte went too far into magic territory where it's not 100% clear why things work in a certain way. And that's something that we're rectifying with Svelte 5. Number 8, a phrase that you hear a lot in web development is choose the right tool for the job. And I get the sentiment behind it. We're all engineers, so we're all familiar with the idea that every design decision involves a trade-off. And so it kind of feels natural that tools can only excel in a fairly narrow range of applications. But it makes us so small in our ambitions. I want us to dream bigger. I don't want to feel like my tools can't handle evolving requirements, or that if I want to dabble in a new field, I need to learn an entirely new way of working before I can do that. So even if it turns out to be unachievable, I find it valuable to ask the question, what would it take for SvelteKit to be the best framework for any app? Whether it's purely static content, or a real-time multiplayer app, or an offline-first productivity app, or even an app designed for an augmented reality headset. Right? Svelte is designed around the idea that you only pay for the features that you use, which suggests that the normal rules about trade-offs might not apply in quite the same way. So are the limits fundamental or are they self-imposed? We need to push them to find out. Number 9, you are all really, really weird. You're spending, and you too, watching on YouTube, you're spending your free time at a meetup for a niche web framework. That is the nerdiest shit imaginable. And I love you for it. But
especially when raining cats and dogs outside.
I mean, that's true. The weather is not kind. But it is useful to remember that most people are not like us. Most people don't care about this sort of thing. They just want to build something cool and get on with their day. And Svelte is for those people too. So when we design things, we need to think about the people who haven't read the docs in a while, if at all, and don't care about things like fine-grained reactivity or configuring their build tool. And this means that things need to be intuitive. We shouldn't need to worry about manual optimizations like memoization. We should have as few APIs as possible, and things need to be discoverable. Like if you hover over the $state rune to try and figure out what it is, it should take you to documentation on the web that explains it and gives examples and all the rest of it. This also informs our approach to documentation and tutorials. It should be possible to build what you want just by finding and learning the concepts that you need right now and worrying about the other stuff for another day. Finally, number 10, I think it's really important that the community, which is to say you lot, feels like it has a stake in the future of the project. And that's not to say that we make decisions democratically, because that just doesn't work at scale, it turns out, nor does it mean that we design by committee, because that makes it impossible to make fast progress on things. But we do want the design and development process to be open. A lot of really good ideas in Svelte have come from outside the core team, and we want to be able to incorporate those into our roadmap. We want to be transparent in our communications, and we want to give everyone a really good opportunity to give feedback on those plans. The word that we use for this is consensus. Those of us on the core team, like we have a vision for what kind of thing we want Svelte to be, but we don't want to foist that vision on people against that will. And so while we can't get unanimous agreement on every change, those of you who were around for Plusgate will know what I mean. We can at least say that like dissenting voices have been heard and they have been considered. We have to balance all that with the practical realities of working on stuff that is still in a very exploratory phase. And so during the early work on Svelte 5, we fell a bit short of those aspirations. So I'm going to close this talk by recommitting to Svelte being a community-driven and consensus-led project. How do I get out of full screen? So I'm really happy to say that we have finally opened the discussions tab on the Svelte repo. And the first discussion is about what our tenets should be. I've shared my thoughts, and now I would love to hear all of yours. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, all right.
I've got the rich mic.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh,
Raffle them out.
what a lot.
For people.
Oh,
We have about 15 minutes, right?
yeah.
Okay, so we have 15 minutes left. We'll discuss a raffle for Svelte merchandise, right, Kev?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
3 t-shirts.
As always, leave the place clean. 3 t-shirts. Leave the place clean. Take your stuff with you. Don't forget your bags. Toilets over there. Exits there. That's about it, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for Cloudflare for organising the venue.
And everyone who's travelled in from Portugal, Zurich, Sweden, and Rich to come in from the United States.
America.
We can't forget Dom as well.
And Dom, yes.
We're going to point you out, Dom.
All the way from Kent. Imagine that.
Right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Over to you. Okay, it's getting t-shirts. It's real. They're really here. This is very exciting.
We can do. We've got the City Council ticket in, so it's 4 people, 4 heads. No pressure, Kirsty.
No pressure.
Right, but I think we can end the stream now.
Haven't Cloudflare got a random number generator that you can use for this?
So we've still got 139 people watching. Did you see it? It's out in the lobby.
There's 4 t-shirts. Yeah,
4
that's it,
t-shirts.
isn't it?
Oh, it's cool, isn't it? Not live names. No, it's
Oh, okay.
Okay, so how does this work?
Press
Because
this
just
button and then you read it out.
oh, it's very complicated.
Quite text.
It's so complicated. Okay,
So
wait,
wait,
pressing the button.
these are only size medium, fortunately. So if you can't wear it, maybe you can give someone who can wear it.
Or just like,
Frame it.
all right.
All right.
It's not spinning, it's not spinning, it's spinning, it's spinning, it's real. Just drag it that now. Adam J.
Yay!
Hey, there we go.
T-shirt gun.
Yeah. Is that like a blue screen, Android? Is that how that works? Is it crashed? Oh, it's working. Okay. How good is it? Julienne, aubergine Julienne.
These hard.
All right. Low battery. Oh, he's not here. Should we spin again? Spin again. Yeah. Oh, it's so slow.
Yeah, it's the one.
So, Matthew Sayer. Hey! Alright, Matthew Sayer. Fingers crossed on everything.
We've got a CJS ticket as well, it's great.
Another one. Amazing. I'm not entering this time.
Anthony Jones. Is it Anthony? Is it seriously Anthony?
It's not me, but it's another organizer.
And Akash.
Akash, you got a t-shirt. All right, CJS ticket, is that?
Yeah, CJS ticket. Who wants to go to CJS?
Is that one? Two people, right. James Bedwell.
Okay.
Okay. Just keep spinning. Yeah, how? 2 minutes on? It's a no. All right, this is fixed. I'm leaving. Bye.
Did you win? Did you win? It's me. I've already got 5 tickets. I can't give
You
away.
want to
So.
spin? You probably want to spin. Is this in Svelte? Should we erase it? No, seriously.
You said you want to go.
You
Yeah.
won. Well, you did ask.
Give it someone else. Right.
Okay. You like to go? Just keep going. Because if we get down to 1, we could just announce the name.
Edgit. It's not Edgit, is it?
No. I'm the bulk.
Alex?
Yeah.
Alex!
Hey!
Hey!
All right. Thank you very much.